Time for a music review, and this review is of the album titled Obscured by Clouds, released in 1972 from the progressive English rock band Pink Floyd. I was inspired to do this video after watching a video on the channel Gatefold 33. He did a sort of fantasy construction of a double album with tracks by Pink Floyd from a variety of albums, and he chose the more obscure albums, and this was one of them. There was quite a few tracks on his fantasy double album, so it prompted me to remind myself of this album, which of course I bought on release at the tender little age of 18. It was the 7th studio album by Floyd, and it was regarded as a soundtrack album for the French film La Vallée. La Vallée was directed by the famous director Barbet Schroeder, and I understand that the album and the movie was recorded in France. Floyd were touring there at the time, and it's a fairly pleasant piece of work. And of course it was a prelude to the next album, the mega album that was known as Dark Side of the Moon. So some of the background then. Pink Floyd had already been involved in a number of soundtracks. Zabriskie Point comes to mind, and of course More, which came out in 1969. Neither of these movies, I recall, were particularly riveting, but the Pink Floyd soundtrack to them both made it a little bit more interesting. More particularly had some strong songs, and More was also directed by Barbet Schroeder. So to this new film, La Vallée, I won't go into too much detail, but this particular movie was about a group of travellers on a spiritual quest to New Guinea, of all places. After the recording was finished, the band then fell out with the film company, and so rather than it being released under the title La Vallée, the band decided to release it under a new title, Obscured by Crowds, which caused a bit of controversy, it has to be said. Short songs on here, which was in contrast really to recent, previous Floyd work really. We had, of course, the lengthy tracks, live tracks on Amagama. Saucer Full of Secrets also had some long tracks. And so these short songs were quite a contrast, really. Some strong country music influences on several of them. Lots of use of acoustic guitars. And there was also a new feature, the VCS3 synthesizer, played by one Rick Wright, and it had some prominent use alongside the electronic drums that Nick Mason was practicing on. So it sort of branched out a little bit, the sort of style of music and the completed sound. Orientation was certainly a factor which suggested that something in the future was going to happen. And of course, the experimentation went to even greater levels with the release in 1973 of The Dark Side of the Moon. But I'm going to go through the tracks to Obscured by Clouds, and track by track, as usual. The opening track fades in, and it's the title track. And we immediately hear Wright on his synthesizer. It oozes its way to your eardrums, and then Gilmour adds the guitar, a very lush guitar sound, to create a sort of dreamy, slow-paced rock, very much a staple of what Floyd had become and would continue to be presenting to their fan base. It's an instrumental. It's very, very clean, very polished, and very, very nice. When You're In is track 2. It's got a decent enough rock riff. It's just recycled continually, and the organ chips in a bit. There's no development on it as I see it. I find that it sort of meanders off into the distance at the end, and the fade out is one of the longest I've ever heard. And one wonders what they were doing in their recording studio to allow a 1.5 minute piece of music to develop into a 2.5 minute through the fade. So very disappointed I was in this. But I read a review that suggested it was glam rocky, the riff that is, and connected Mark Bolan to this, but I can't see any connection whatsoever. It was all rather mundane, When You're In, but it's also an instrumental. Track 3, Burning Bridges, lyrics courtesy of one Roger Waters. Wright was responsible for the music here, and I'll touch on this track now. Very characteristic of what Pink Floyd's music was like at the time, becoming more like a sort of very slow, dreamy, psychedelic sort of phasing type with rhythm and a lazy sort of guitar solo, and the sort of vocal delivery particularly by both Gilmour and Waters. They seem pretty compatible, and I got a vision of sitting in an English country garden in midsummer with a drink, possibly a beer, and maybe smoking a joint, and sort of gliding off into the atmosphere, the stratosphere, while listening to Gilmour's eloquent and tasteful guitar solos. That's what it sums up for me anyway, and it still sounds wonderful. And just checking on the lyric, it appears that I got it all wrong, because there is no Waters on vocals. Vocals are shared by Gilmour on 1 and verse 3, and verse 2 is sang by Wright. So, poor preparation here, John, but now I'm going to indulge you with the lyrics. Here are the lyrics to Burning Bridges. Bridges burning gladly, merging with the shadow, flickering between the lines, stolen moments floating softly on the air, borne on wings of fire and climbing higher. Verse 2. Ancient bonds are breaking, moving on and changing sides, dreaming of a new day, cast aside the other way. Magic vision steering, kindled by and burning, flames rise in her eyes. The door that stands ajar, the wall that once were high, beyond the gilded cage, beyond the reach of ties. The moment is at hand, she breaks the golden band. I rather like them. Not exactly sure what it means, but I guess it's a possibly the end of a relationship, possibly a marriage. And some of the imagery, I'm not too sure really. Maybe you can suggest an explanation for this lyric. Is the gold is in the, whatever that means. It's a bit more up-tempo and a bit of a rocker. It's got a very American sound to me, sort of almost West Coast rock beat, I feel. And for its time, it had an impact. It's not stood the test of time that well, however. But nevertheless, you know that this is an album soundtrack song. So that possibly puts it into some sort of perspective. So we move on to the next track, which is What's the Deal? What's the Deal? A lovely acoustic-driven song, almost folk-like in its delivery, with some very pleasant vocals and a great little piano outro from Wright. This is one of the best songs on here, I think. The songs maybe got a nod to the notion of we're about to become rich. We're on the cornerstone, on the edge of something big. And it's about right, because we're moving on in age and we deserve some sort of spotlight. They may well be a rather fleeting interpretation of this song, but once again, it's a very nicely presented one with Gilmour on lead vocals and another collaboration with the writing between Gilmour and Waters. So, that's What's the Deal? Closing track on side A is Mudmen. This was a particular favourite for me way back in '72. As I said, I was at the tender age of 18, and Floyd were my number one band. Very impressionable I was, but listening to it tonight, it may be 2022, and I'm approaching my 68th birthday, so it's 50 years back, but it still holds a glow. It's got a very pedestrian piano drum beat, and it throws up images of the hot summer days for some reason. And then a couple of minutes in, just under 2 minutes in, Gilmour opened the shoulders once again, and his sort of whizzy, spacey, psychedelic solo with God knows what pedals he's using is absolutely stunning. It hits you smack in the face. It really does still sound absolutely tremendous. This is an instrumental again, and Gilmour just takes us up into the stratosphere. He's quite a wonderful guitar player, it has to be said. And at this time in their development, and in my development, back in 1972, it was a perfect marriage. And just additionally to draw attention to Wright's array of sounds. And it really was absolutely fantastic to hear this song. And the synthesizers back on display. And he's also, Wright, put in some Hammond organ, although it's dubbed, obviously, and then some piano, of course. So it fits neatly surrounding Gilmour's extravagant guitar playing. Very much a highlight. Mud Men. Flip it over, it's side B or side 2. Childhood's End starts off, and you can almost hear the dark side of the moon on it. Sort of perspective, it's a sort of with a piece of music without really any form or beat at the intro. There ain't no percussion either. The keyboard sort of allows us to drift in, and then slowly the percussion is added by slowly ticking us through. It's almost identical, really, to the track Time on Dark Side of the Moon, and very familiar, almost a carbon copy. This was the last song written by Gilmour, so I found out. After this, Walters dominated, and Gilmour's writing talents only returned after Walters had left the band. So it gives some idea of how, after this, Walters was basically took control of the writing for the band. And there's also a reference to the title possibly being derived from the Arthur C. Clarke novel of the same name. Another point about Gilmour, I mentioned that before, last time writing the lyrics. There's another typical guitar solo by Gilmour to a chunky rhythm, which is impressive. So let's move on. We're now on to Free For. This was a single, that's spelled Freefour. It was a single in the US. Don't know whether it made much impact. Only the second ever, of course, to appear on the other side of the pond after See Emily Play. There's also suggestion that it references Roger Waters' father, his death in World War II. It's a very sing-along sort of type song, very jocular. Starts off with a 1, 2, 3, 4. The Cockney accent on the intro, and it's a chirpy sort of extravagant rock guitar solo further in towards the end. Untypical, really, of Gilmour, but it goes on a bit too long, I think. It should really have been about 3 minutes, but it's gone into the 5th minute, and it drags. But the lyrics are interesting, so I'm going to do a little recital on those lyrics for Free For. 1, 2, 3, 4. The memories of a man in his old age are the deeds of a man in his prime. You shuffle in gloom of the sick room and talk to yourself as you die. Life is a short warm moment, and death is a long cold rest. You get your chance to try in the twinkling of an eye, 80 years with luck or even less. So all aboard for the American tour, and maybe you'll make it to the top. And mind how you go, and I can tell you, because I know, you may find it hard to get off. You are the angel of death, and I am the dead man's son. And he was buried like a mole in a foxhole, and everyone is still on the run. And who is the master of foxhounds? And who says the hunt has begun? And who calls the tune in the courtroom? And who beats the funeral drum? The memories of a man in his old age are the deeds of a man in his prime. You shuffle in gloom in the sick room and talk to yourself as you die. Yeah, very much a note about Waters' father, I think. And I must admit, it was sang and written, of course, by Roger. And the words are absolutely brilliant. And it's certainly the strongest track lyrically on this set of songs. Next, it's sung by Wright. It's a love song as such, and it's got a very contemporary feel, pop song-like, pop feel. It's obviously there are bits of twangy Gilmore guitar thrown in to remind us that we're listening to Pink Floyd, but it's very much a love song in nature and quite appealing. The latter part of the song was we got the opportunity to listen to some rather extravagant wah-wah guitar from Gilmore, and it's a highlight. The vocals are again shared by Wright and Waters. Wright responsible for writing the song, and then we move to the final track, the finale, and it's called Absolute Curtains. It's an instrumental, and once again we're introduced to Wright's new toy, the synthesizer, at the intro, and at the back end we hear the chanting of the Mapuka tribe, who were part of the movie. So if you get to see it, it'll sort of fit together. La Valliere, the movie. These ancient ethnic tribe are from New Guinea, and the instrumental obviously harks back a little to some of the sounds that the Floyd heard when they were on location. And it really reminds us all that we're at the back end of the 60s. Tracks such as on Saucerful Secrets and Ummagumma come to light. Self-indulgent psychedelia. The authenticity of the chants are reflected in the fact that, of course, it was a soundtrack to this movie in New Guinea bush. There was a star in the movie, Monique Girardi, and she, apart from being a film editor, was also a vocalist and synthesizer player who played with David Allen's gong. David Allen, you may know, was in the Soft Machine. And also this young woman had a relationship with Steve Hillage, a sort of hippie-style guitar player. So it all sort of fits together for the time and the era. This album, this song, and this experience knits together lovely. So there we are. That's my review of Obscured by Clouds. I must admit, overall, I did enjoy the album. I probably won't play it again for another decade or so, but it's now lodged back in the memory in a clear perspective. So give it a listen. This is my review of the 1972 soundtrack album, Obscured by Clouds, by Pink Floyd.